News Radio, 1120 KPNW. Hey, look who's back. Robert and Dawn from the Secret Wine Society. Still a secret, is it?
I guess the secret's getting out, but yeah, thanks for having us on again. We always love it.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
All right. So we talked about sake last week. And
Yes.
Sake is what we call sake, but in Japan, that's just another word for alcohol.
Correct.
And what do they call sake again?
They call it Nihon Shu, S-H-U, so Nihonshu. Basically, Nihon is Japan, Shu is alcohol.
All right. And we tried 3 of them last week. They were all really tasty, very different, but all really tasty. And we kind of wanted to start, I guess, going back to the whole idea of, what is... the milling rates from this stuff. I mean, it's rice, but they mill the outside of it off, and sometimes, they go down to all you've got left is like 20 or 30% of the piece of rice left.
Correct. So last time we gave a general overview, and so that we're going to be limited on time. So if you missed that conversation, it's on YouTube. But we're going to start off with the first step in making sake.
Okay.
And I'm not going to include hitting up your rich uncle for startup capital. So
all right.
Let's put that aside. So the first term you're going to run into with sake is called the seimai buai. That's the Japanese for the milling rate or the polishing rate. This is how much of the rice grain you're taking off. You're going to hear those two terms pretty equally. You could say this sake is highly milled, or you could say it's highly polished. Now, I prefer polished because I've noticed that people that seem to catch on to sake that more quickly, they're more highly polished themselves, basically. So I like that term.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay.
It just, I think it's a more elegant way to say it. You're really saying the same thing, but you'll hear milled or polished, but I prefer polished. So the reason they're doing this, and we mentioned this last time, so you get some white rice, and it's only white because you've milled 10% off just to make table rice.
Right.
Now, I've given you a handout here of...
We have handouts.
We do. So,
Yes, studying time.
So to start with, sake rice is a little bit different. If you look at the one on the left here, it's the sake rice, and it says white core, which is called the Shinpaku. So they've bred it to have more of the carbohydrate, which they want, in the middle. So as you mill it away or polish it away, you're losing less of what you want to keep. So you see the food rice here, it's more distributed.
Yeah.
So if you mill that away, it's kind of a mishmash. You're getting rid of stuff you want and what you don't want. Now, why they do this, in Japanese, there's a concept called zatsumi, which just translates as off flavors.
No.
Now, what is an off flavor? It all depends on, if you're trying to make a highly purified sake, you don't want other flavors except for these nice, pure, fruity flavors. But the first sake we're going to try here is milled down to 85, which means they've gotten rid of only 15% of the rice. Okay, so Don's going to pass these around. Now, this is an interesting sake. The brewery's called Miyake Honten, and they're located in Hiroshima. And they're using a very rare rice called Shinriki. That translates as divine power. So this sake is not, this would have zatsumi in it. It's not trying to be a super purified product.
But there's also a reason that they don't mill it
You know,
all
it's
the way down.
really interesting about
Right?
this to me, as opposed to smelling like a rice wine, smells like a grape wine. Do you notice that?
Yeah,
I mean, it really does.
I can see that.
It's
It's got really good savoriness to it. So the company, this is called Sempuku. And there's a lot of information. If you look at the front of this thing,
this makes me want pork.
Well, and one reason why it's hard for people to sell sake is there's a lot of information on the front of this label, which is important to how they made the sake.
But they can't read Japanese.
And like it says Kimoto Zukuri on the front, which is something we're going to talk about later. And that's an important fact about that sake, but it's not on the back in English anywhere. The other thing about this sake is it's a Genshu, which means it's had no water added at the end to bring down the alcohol content. So actually, you could drink this on the rocks.
Yeah, I was going to say, this says it's 20% alcohol. I mean, that's
about as high as most sakes will get. Now, that Genshu term we'll come back to. All it's telling you is we didn't dilute the final product to get a lower alcohol content. So you're getting just a full-on, like, very, very nice sake, but it's got a lot of power. This is one of my favorites, and this is kind of what a lot of the sake geeks are drinking right now.
This would be a good gateway sake for people that normally drink wine, because of the sakes you brought in, as far as grape wines go, this is maybe as close to that as we've tasted so far. That's just my assessment. I'll let you argue with me now.
Well, no, I think it's a good entry point, because actually I've done some testing in the shop. Hey, try this, and you'd be surprised people like this style. Now, they're going after the wine market, so the first thing people usually see in a Japanese restaurant would be something designed to go with very clean sushi or something like that. You wouldn't have this with sushi. This would be more savory dishes, roasted vegetables, chicken, something like that. So this rice was almost extinct. It was actually, there was a farmer, and I'm going to give him a shout out because he actually never got to see the success of his name was Maro Jujiro. And he found a couple of stalks that looked different in his field. He's like, okay, what are these? He ended up growing more of it. It became famous as a sake rice. Mm-hmm. And this company actually had their stuff on some of the early Japanese naval ships that went to the equator and back for like 220 days. And the sake held up very well, which normally heat or light will destroy it. They got a really good reputation and started serving this stuff. The Navy picked it up, basically.
Right.
So you'll notice, too, like these labels are great. They've got the Japanese paper on them. And then so the rice went out of favor for a while, but then this company brought it back in about 2005 from about 5 grams of rice seeds.
5 grams is a very tiny amount.
Yes. Yeah, and so
it's not much.
So there's a term you'll see on a lot of labels. It's called mabaroshi. Okay, mabaroshi means phantom. So they'll say this is a mabaroshi sake rice, like the phantom sake rice, because it was obscure and hard to find, hard to get. Mm-hmm. But I really like this sake, and this milling rate that you're going to see is important. Now, something like this, now I sent you that video of these mortar and pestles. Mm-hmm. They're giant beams, and the one I showed you was run with water.
Yeah, and that's the way that they milled it.
Correct. And when you did it that way, you could only mill it down to like 90. So these super premium styles, which we'll go to in a minute, weren't possible then. So in the 1770s, you started to get suisha, which are water wheels. Mm-hmm. Okay, before that, they were doing it by hand. Like, imagine that same machine I showed you, this giant beam hooked up, to a big stone, just pounding the rice. But all you did is, with the water wheels, get rid of the people. But you didn't actually get more highly polished rice because you still had that same giant beam moving back and forth. So everything kind of changed in 1896 with Riichi Satake. And he's based in Hiroshima, and he made the first mechanical-driven rice polisher. But this thing is basically still mortar and pestle. It's hooked up to essentially a lawnmower engine. And it would just bounce back and forth. I mean, you can see the machine online. It's like a 3.5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton motor just pounding back and forth. So you've gotten rid of the water wheel now, but you still haven't improved the actual production. You're still getting about the same amount of milling or polishing, right? Maybe 90 if you're lucky. So 10 years later, though, or actually a little bit less than 10 years later, they switched over to the vertical rice milling machine. So this is where you drop it between two abrasive rollers, and you could start to really get the grinding or the milling rate very low. So these super premium styles weren't possible before you had this rice milling machine. So, and keep in mind, like, these machines are super noisy. A lot of breweries don't have their own. They outsource it because they run them at night because the electricity is low. You imagine if your neighbor had one of these. I mean, it's incredibly loud, running at all the wrong times, throwing up all this nuka, which is basically the rice powder.
The dust.
Right. So, and that's how this stuff progressed. You needed to have these machines, and you needed to be able to mill this stuff further down. So I really like this sake. So my wife's going to pour something, a couple of them actually. We're going to go to the opposite end, and we're going to do something that's very highly milled.
Okay.
So this next one is from a company called Kubota, and these guys are located in Niigata. Now, she's going to pour this in a wine glass and a little ochoko.
Yeah, which are like little shot sort of
Correct.
glasses.
So this is the Yanagi ochoko. And the reason we're using two glasses is because what happens when you do something, they're aiming for something very purified, more like a white wine. So you're trying to get more of an aroma.
Wow, that smells really fruity. That almost... Okay, Rob, close your eyes and think of juicy fruit when you sniff this.
Oh, yeah.
It smells like juicy fruit gum. Okay,
100%.
that's out of the shot glass. Huh. No, I still get it. Maybe a little bit of banana that I'm smelling in the wine glass.
Yeah, so the first one was Shinriki rice, right?
Yeah.
And these guys are using a different rice called Takane Nishiki.
That is good.
Oh, man. This could catch up with
That
it.
is good.
Okay.
That's phenomenal.
Right.
I
So
mean, I like the other, but this is kind of, well...
right.
off the
So
hook.
and so here's the thing. So we started off with something milled to 85. So when I say it's polished 85, that means they've milled away or polished away 15%. This particular one is called, and I thought of you when I picked up this bottle. It's called Senshin. The translation in English is sophisticated mind.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it was like jerky guy or something.
That's the English.
Little weasel.
Well, Senshin actually, so that's the English translation. So Senshin actually comes from a Chinese book. It's basically the
I Ching.
right, the I Ching or the I Ching you've heard of.
So what's the mill rating on this one?
So this is 28. So 72% of the rice. Now think about it, and so sake rice, like I showed you that picture, so it's different and it's much more expensive. You've already gotten rid of 72% of your initial product, so they're going to be expensive by nature when they mill them down this far. I don't think my wife poured me. Oh, she did pour me some. Okay,
Boy,
I
this
mean,
is so darn good. I don't know what... So the hard part of this, for me, is because this is something that has been really, other than, a couple of times in my life, out of my wheelhouse drinking sake. It's kind of like you have a little bit of a hard time trying to figure out how to describe it because it's not something you're used to having.
I'd agree with that. So just running a wine shop, what you see, this works with wine as well. So take Nebbiolo, for example, really famous grape from Piedmont. And if people haven't had it before, and I give them a good one, they look puzzled because the flavors are different.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of see their brain trying to process these new flavors. This is the exact same thing. So what happens is the more you drink this, the more you can start to distinguish the differences between the sakes, and your appreciation grows. It just takes tasting experience. But you can tell the difference. So if you go back, the first one, So what I want to say is like this. So when people market sake, all they talk about is the milling rate because it's easy to understand a number.
Right.
And it's easy to think, well, this is milled down to 28, so it has to be better than the 85. The 85 is not trying to be the 28 or the 23. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It comes down to style. Now, when they start talking about sake in the trade, it's literally all they talk about because they think people won't get your information or they're going to confuse them further. But the milling rate is important for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to give you an indication of the style of the sake. If this is milled down to 28, it's not going to taste like that 85 because you've gotten rid of a lot more of the rice, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't make the 85 bad because I like that.
It depends on what you're having with it, what mood you're in, what type of sake you like. I mean, that 85 it's full, it's savory.
Yeah.
Now this one's much cleaner, but I mean, it's a beautiful sake, right? And so their name Senshin, like she said, came from the I Ching book, and basically means purification of the heart. So if you go to Japan to like a Shinto shrine, a lot of times they'll have these. They're made out of like old weathered stone, and it's got well water rushing into it. And you use it to wash your hands and your mouth before you walk onto the grounds. It's like a purification process. And a lot of times they'll have those characters like engraved Senshin on that giant, it's like a water basin carved out of rock. It's kind of like our version of, here at Price, they just kill your television. I think that would probably be kind of it.
What would you pair this with?
So these are going to need something like really clean sashimi. This is something you would want to have in a really high-end sushi shop where you've got, the fish comes out of the water, it's raw fish, it's clean, like you need these clean flavors. You're not going to have this with, savory foods or whatever. This is
So you're not going to be doing this with, say,
barbecue. Correct.
I was just going to say barbecue.
So
it's really good.
This is
phenomenal.
It is one of my favorites. So
Actually,
it got quiet as we're all drinking.
well, I was just going to say, I actually like it more out of the little sake glass as opposed to the wine glass. To me, this, for whatever reason, just tastes better.
So here's the thing. So this is an important step. So, I watch a lot of trade industry videos of people based in Japan that are trying to sell the sake to the United States because 1973 was the peak of the sake market. It's been in decline ever since. And they have a dwindling population, so they're trying to export this stuff. Now, their secret plan is to make it more like wine. But the problem is, they're always putting it in a wine glass. Now, this one was designed for a wine glass. This is the Dassai, and I sent you some information about this company.
Kind of interesting. I mean, it was a very small company. The guy's father was running it, and it was, I guess you could almost say, on the brink of just going away because they sold so little of it. And he came up with, I mean, it's a long story, and I am really compressing this. He basically came up with a way to produce a quality sake without a brewmeister or a brewmaster.
Correct. It's a toji.
And also, it's much more mechanized, I guess you could say, than the original way of making sake. And it's kind of like turned over the course of, about a decade or so, it's turned into, if you will, the big dog in the world sake market.
Yeah, so Dassai is a powerhouse. And basically...
3 minutes?
Okay, so we'll get into the story in a second, but Dassai has 17% of the export market. And since he took over, it's basically had like 30% growth every year. Their marketing is phenomenal. Now, they do have detractors.
Well, yeah, because it's not traditional.
But their stuff is beautiful. It's kind of like my attitude is, think about it. It's like this. Yamaguchi's far from Tokyo.
Cantaloupe.
They weren't selling a lot. This guy becomes hugely successful because he's good at marketing and the stuff is good. So it's like, hey, don't hate me because I'm beautiful.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like you can't not like this. You have to agree that the guy has it dialed in.
It's completely different from the other two. Very good. I get like those green cantaloupes.
Anise. Oh, you're on the.
Yeah, I'm on.
Oh, he's racing ahead.
Yeah. But yeah, Rob says anise. I think I smell that a little bit, but I'm thinking those green cantaloupes.
Yeah,
It
or
kind
like
of
fresh cut cucumbers.
yeah. I mean I definitely get a hit of that. This is really wow. I can see why they're doing well.
Well, and the other thing, they only make high-end premium. Now we're going to get into the terms Ginjo and Daiginjo, and we'll do a whole show about it at some point.
Okay. So you have all three of these. Why don't you kind of run through the first, second, and third real quick, and then we'll let people know where the Secret Wine Society is. If you haven't tried the different sakes, it's fun. I like it. I mean, it's something completely different. I mean,
I didn't know I was a sake fan.
No, I didn't either. And
Thank you.
This would turn you into a sake fan. As somebody just wrote, you guys are going to turn us into day drinkers. Sounds fantastic.
Yeah, Friday morning, right?
So give us the three again.
Okay, so the first one is the Sempuku Shinriki 85.
You'll remember that, right?
Yep, so it's 80. It's only milled 15% away, and it's going to be like a fuller style. The second one is the Senshin, or sophisticated mind. It's a Junmai Daiginjo. We'll get to that term later. It has to have a milling rate that low to be called a Daiginjo. The third one is Dassai. Dassai translates as Otter Festival. And the reason they call it that, with the river otters used to line up their fish on the shore like they were trying to sell them at a market. And this is milled down to 23. This is their high end. Anything Dassai makes is epic. Like I said, they have their detractors. It's not that one's better than another, but they're all dynamite.
Yeah, they're all good. Of course, you can find these at the Secret Wine Society, located down in Oakland, Oregon, just about an hour's drive from here. Go down, check out the shop. How late do you open tomorrow?
Tomorrow, we are open till 10.
Okay, open till 10 p.m. And, of course, there's food and charcuterie boards and beer and wine and you name it. And it's secret. So because there's only 15 of us, you see, we're keeping it in the family here. All right, that's a wrap. Tomorrow, radio auction starts at 8 a.m. Rob and I back at it. And we may be drinking sake tomorrow morning to kind of celebrate the morning, a little morning sake. All right, that's a wrap.